In a world of AI-generated noise, authenticity is what still cuts through. But how can you be authentic? Well, the answer is simple. You have to show up. Show up to your customers' offices, go to events where they are as well, set up community dinners. This is exactly how Cliff Simons has driven millions of revenue by being present. Today, we break down exactly how he is doing it so you can do it too. Enjoy.
You're not necessarily always going in with the expectation that you're selling something, but you should be going in with the expectation of curiosity, trying to learn something new within the B2B space. We want to buy the way that we do in our consumer lives. That experience is largely driven off of word of mouth and referral, and we typically have those conversations, if not over text, in person with the people that we know and trust. What is realistic is to spend time, get to know people, develop relationships. That can build you a really solid long tail, but you have to be willing to play the long game.
Do you want to start off with your new logistical challenge that you just shared with me?
Yeah, the new logistical challenge is we are expecting baby number 4, which is wild. We've been married 6 years, got pregnant on the honeymoon, and the last 6 years have been quite intense.
You know, other people would say very efficient. So congratulations, obviously, to the two of you. Hope
I'm not
everything's
German,
gonna
so
go
I
great.
can't say that, you know?
But I mean, let's get into the first thing you and I started chatting about when we met first. It was like, oh, you're what, a quarter Dutch, or what was it? What was it?
I'm half, you know. I'm a full-blooded citizen. You know, got my KLM hat, got the 747. You know, got to have Ajax here. There's some Dutch paraphernalia back there. You see some orange.
Nice. Cliff, so I think we had 1 or 2 calls once, but actually we spent more time in person than on the phone, which is probably something very unusual.
Very different.
Very unusual, I would say, which was also the reason why I was like, hey, you know what, Cliff, we need to get you on. And instead of talking about a lot of this Rev Ops as a service at Carabiner Group and all the go-to-market knowledge that you have, which is truly impressive, and we should dive into that maybe another time, and maybe do a little bit today. But what I thought was really interesting about you is that you literally travel everywhere, talk to everyone on every event, do this whole thing that everyone is preaching. You actually go and execute it, right? While having 3 and now 3+1 kids at home, etc., etc., etc. So jumping into this, kind of how did you come to this idea, I want to say, of being so in-person driven, going to all of those events, doing all of that stuff? How did this develop?
Well, I think in part I'm an extrovert, so that helps. But even pre-COVID, some of my first sales jobs were door to door, right? I was literally, you know, we call it pounding the pavement for a Fortune 20, right? You went in and you met people and you built the rapport, and you sold to them face to face because you learned about their business and their actual challenges, and it was very consultative. So it doesn't feel odd to me in that regard, right? You're not necessarily always going in with the expectation that you're selling something, but you should be going in with the expectation of curiosity, trying to learn something new. In my case, I've been in dozens of industries, so I want to be able to constantly learn new things for myself, and sometimes there's really interesting overlap with the things that I've seen. So I think that's fun to share. I also have a really deep-seated belief that within the B2B space, we want to buy the way that we do in our consumer lives. And that experience is largely driven off of word of mouth and referral. And we typically have those conversations, if not over text, in person with the people that we know and trust. So I think that really drives a lot of behavior.
So you've been a sales rep for Fortune 20, and this in-person stuff makes absolute sense. It feels for many of us, maybe my generation, feels almost like archaic, like a long time ago. But then
I can't be that much older than you.
Maybe, I don't know. Let's just play along with this for now, okay? But ultimately, the in-person sales stuff versus what I see you do, going to communities and being there in person and showing up, those are still 2 different things, right? Both of them are in person, yes. But the community piece was When did that develop? Was that something with Carabiner Group? Was this a post-COVID thing? Kind of how did you get into that modus of operating?
So pre-COVID, tried to find those pockets where my customers would go to get help, right? Where were the places that they went to get their questions answered and start developing relationships there. Whether that was at conferences, even if your company wouldn't buy you the ticket, maybe you show up at the bar or the hotel and sort of hawk people's LinkedIn and their badges, right? In a post-COVID world, everything shifted to online, and you were able to go into these communities and develop relationships because people were looking for that human connection. And where that sits now is you have the ability to meet people online in these types of places, but then that all becomes amplified by actually meeting them in person.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that it works if you just do one or the other. You have to have both.
Yeah, I mean, we had Sam on the show a while back, actually, and I think he was also reflecting on some of his experiences building Pavilion, where everything was in the beginning very local, then shifted very much digital, right? I think chapters was a thing before, and then it wasn't.
Yep.
And then actually realizing that this was one of the main things, right? You're kind of, I actually don't know, but you're probably a chapter head for somewhere in Pavilion, right? Kind of why did you take up that burden? Kind of because it's also a lot of work, it's responsibility. I know there's a couple of things that chapter heads actually need to do. Why did you do this? Why did you take this up?
I personally have learned so much in Pavilion, whether it was taking like CRO school or revenue growth architecture, or just like the relationships that I developed. There are people that I have met over the last 5+ years of being in Pavilion that have given me incredible advice that I would never have been able to get anywhere else. And being a chapter head is one of my ways of being able to give back to the community and say thank you.
I think it's super honorable. I think it's absolutely honorable, and I think too little of the B2B world is thinking about it this way and is driven by this. I think a lot of people are thinking, what can I get first, right? What's your opinion on that?
If you are looking to extract without ever feeding into something, you are never going to feel like you're getting enough, right? And it's never going to be fulfilling. Like you might hit some commercial target, but that's not why these things exist, right? Yeah, I'm very bought in on Sam's entire idea of, you give to give. I think it's so much more powerful. The relationships I've built, no commercial value could be placed on that, right?
Do you have like one or two examples that you want to go deeper in on and say like, hey, this was crazy?
Yeah. So when I took CRO school, God, whenever the heck that was now, I still have a cohort. There's probably like 8 to 10 of us that still show up on a Zoom call every 2 weeks for the last 3.5 years. And we've helped each other with job offers. When we sold Carabiner, the guys took a look at my equity agreements and all that kind of stuff. We've helped each other with things like marriages, divorces, having to go through a RIF, having to execute a RIF, right? So all the different things that you go through, and to be around folks, and I'm probably one of the younger guys in the group, right? There's a couple of us under 40. There's a bunch of guys in there that are in their 50s, a couple in their 60s, a couple that have VC and PE backgrounds, a couple who've had 3 to 5 exits. So being able to get that level of knowledge together in a trusted space where I can call any one of them any day of the week and they will answer, that's incredibly valuable to me. And I think that's like the cornerstone of what communities like Pavilion are built on.
To say it bluntly, I think there's monetary value in this too, though, right? I mean, you have been obviously building the Carabiner group, and I think you mentioned somewhere that a majority of the revenue, I don't know when that was specifically, but a majority of revenue could be attributed somehow. I don't know how you do it. Maybe that's a different topic. But back to some of those events, right?
So yeah, I'd have to go back and look at the data on the event side. I know on the community word of mouth side, year one was like 53, 56%. Year two was high 80s. Low, no, sorry, it was in the 90s of percentile. And then high 80s for year three was driven back to that concept. And Pavilion in those first 2.5 years, probably like 40% of the revenue was coming through that. But it was never selling, right? It was never selling. It was showing up and having conversations with people and getting referrals.
So that was almost my point, right? So this level of impact, and again, right, I think so. Carabiner Group, what is that? It's kind of revenue operations as a service. I think this is how you guys started out. I'm not sure if that's still the positioning. um Consultative sale, big tickets, I assume, right? Big Fortune 500 kind of customers.
No, most of our customers like Series A to Series D.
And obviously it's kind of a trust-based sale that needs to happen there, right? So kind of community totally makes sense. But I think the more important point here is, you didn't go to those events and said, hey, I'm from Carabiner Group, those are the things we're doing, do you want to buy? You came there with a very different approach, right?
Yeah,
And I
completely
think
different
this
posture.
it's I think this is a difficult thing to grasp for people, to be like, I kind of have a business purpose here that should result in a business outcome. But the way to go about it, and I don't mean this in a Machiavellian way, the way to go about it is not to try and go straight for the goal, but be helpful, be a member, be part of it, and then good
Yep.
things will come from it, right? I mean, that's not only what I'm hearing from you right now, it's what I'm hearing from a bunch of people. And I just think it's really difficult for many folks to, take this leap of faith. Like, oh, you know what? Instead of spending this time and traveling there and showing up at those events, maybe we just buy a sponsorship package of 40K. But you should do that too. I'm not talking this down. But, there's, it feels like it's a shortcut when it might actually not be, right? I'm not sure what your view on this is.
When I think of building a business, I don't think about just the short term. How can I get revenue in the door in the next 3 to 6 months? Yes, that there's always that, right? But you also have to be thinking of the long tail of the business. What are people going to say about you when you're not in the room anymore? When you don't have the ability to be in the room? How can you drive influence and perspective in those moments? Because in most buying cycles, you're not going to be there, right? You're present for 5 to 10% maybe of a buying cycle, at the most, depending on how many vendors they're evaluating. So I don't think it's realistic to show up and try to just throw up with your sales pitch all over people. What is realistic is to spend time, get to know people, develop relationships, and that can build you a really solid long tail. But you have to be willing to play the long game, right? Got calls from folks to do some really serious work, 7 figures worth of work kind of thing. 2 years after you met them for the first time and you haven't talked in a year and a half, right? But showing up and being genuine and helping instead of trying to always take, has a significant psychological effect. And
Yeah.
it helps that's the right thing to do. So like we all win.
We talked about you having a Dutch mom, dad? I forgot.
Both my parents are Indo, so Dutch and Indonesian. Yeah.
Yes. My point being, I'm trying to put you into a little bit of a European box here too, right? Basically saying like, hey, obviously you're a US guy, but basically the 2 times I saw you, you came here. I didn't go to the US, right? I mean, and this was twice in Berlin in 4 weeks, 6 weeks or something like this. So really, really short time actually. The question that I actually have is, do you think that and you and I at the event, we talked about the difference in mindset and Rev Ops between the US and Europe. And, some people will DM me now and like, what did Cliff say? But my bigger point here is actually, do you think there's a difference also in how Europeans go about those communities? Do they think less short term? Is that less of a thing for them? Or is it the same between those two communities? Cultures rather.
That's interesting. I think in the US it tends to be a more give or get, right? I think there's a lot more folks over here who are driven to go and get the thing. So my experience with folks in Europe is that they tend to be a lot more collaborative. They tend to look for consensus more often. And I don't know if that's a way to evolve, an evolution of trying to avoid creating unnecessary tension, or
Yeah.
I don't know, you Germans have ways about you. Um, but things do move considerably slower in the
Yeah.
European market, even the decision-making process, right? And I wonder if more folks were involved in things like a pavilion, and you could drive the overall education level of unit economics and what it means to actually run a company versus look at my product. Isn't this thing amazing? Um, I think that could be beneficial. And I think that's actually the biggest difference in mindset. Most of Europe creates a really good product, but they have no idea how to tell that value proposition and how to relate that to the return that a customer should expect, by and large.
I think you can ask any European and they will say Americans know how to sell and how to market. Like, that's for sure. Question I have, right? Kind of, I'm sitting here, I'm someone maybe listening to this podcast, and I'm thinking, hey, this Cliff guy, amazing. Kind of, he drove so much revenue from this thing. I always want to, find more revenue streams. We're seeing the whole AI development of, oh, you can't trust an email anymore. Soon you can't trust a voice call anymore. Even a video call is a question mark. So the real thing is going to be in person, right? If you were to start over in this day and age, and with your belief system, by the way, how would you go about it? Like, how would you get started into this community / event / in-person environment?
Value focused, I would try to find 4 to 6 topics that folks are talking about, and then run a roundtable / Q&A session type of event. Basically like a larger scale workshop, maybe something in the nature of like 30 to 60 folks. And then I'd break out a chunk of them for dinner afterwards. And I'd get sponsors to cover the cost by and large. And I would do that every other month or every month.
Yeah.
In different cities around the country.
Yeah. And show up, obviously, and kind of run the whole thing. When I talked to Jacko last, kind of, he was talking about this whole human-led growth. I think kind of that's the term for this now. But he was also talking about being the keynote speaker at an event is kind of cool, but what actually really drives engagement and to a degree then also follow up are actually more those workshop style, Q&A style sessions.
Yeah.
Now I hear you immediately jump there. Is that also your experience?
I think so, right? I think keynoting or being able to be on a stage is great, and it's good optics, and you can get a message across and try to help drive education. But most people learn hands-on when they have the ability to wrestle with a concept, and I think being able to give feedback and speak into it and participate is a big part of that. So that's why the workshops or roundtables, whatever you want to call it, tend to work so well.
Let me switch gears a little bit. So you've been traveling a lot, not only to Europe. The US is a big place too, right? It's not like you just drive down the street and then there's another meetup. It's you traveling all over the place. What are your tips and tricks on how to get all of that logistically done, right? Because to a degree, you traveling, talking to people, sure, this is giving to give, and it's building relationships. It's also, let's just say, if you want to box it in, it's also a sales and marketing effort to a degree, right? But then there also needs to be all the other stuff of running a company and delivering the services, and then you have your family that is ever growing. Kind of, how do you get all of this under one roof? How do you squeeze all of that into 24 hours?
There's only 24 hours in a day. Crap. Um, yeah, I mean, my wife is incredible. I'll start there, and she does a
Yeah.
great job with the house and the kids and making sure that everything's always pretty steady here. It's not the easiest for sure, and there's so many different things going on that you have to ruthlessly prioritize. And I think in the earlier days when you're trying to figure out what's working, what's the right messaging, what's the right event, what's the right strategy going into an event, you play around a lot and you sort of start figuring out what works. I think for
Mhm.
me, one of the important things of being at all of these different events is I'm constantly talking to the people that are typically my ICP, and I get to hear all of their challenges, what's going on in the market, what they're looking for, and I feel like for for our firm, my role is really to be at the forefront of it to make sure I understand what the market is demanding and what
Mhm.
the market requires of us. And the
Mhm.
only way to get that is to be speaking with people in real time. Um,
Yeah.
as far as like
Right.
the logistics, I typically don't work on planes. Um, I sleep really well there, so that works. Um, and then yeah, it's checking emails constantly when you're not in person at an event, scheduling time to do that, and then scheduling time at the end of the evening to write follow-up emails, Salesforce notes, um, following up on what's going on throughout the day. I think the other thing I've gotten much more comfortable with over the last year or two is just doing regular check-ins with the team. So not being afraid to step away. And now I know like the run of show of a lot of the different types of events we're going to. So I can typically find the right times to go and schedule to be with the team or to get on that sales call or to
Mhm.
get with marketing or whatever it is that I'm supposed to be doing.
Kind of in this process, right? Kind of on the one hand side, you are understanding the structure of each of these events better, which makes it, possible for you to squeeze the rest of your day into this, more or less, right?
Hmm.
That's how I'm understanding it. But like, how do you know that something was a good event? Like, how do you get to the conclusion on the flight back home, think about, you know what, next year I should show up again? How do you make that decision?
Do the right type of people show up that I need to be speaking to? Was that event part of a strategy to drive revenue this year or next? Or was it market research, right? Like there's different reasons to be in different places. Was it brand? Was it actually a sales motion? So I think all of those factors go into whether or not an event was solid. We typically look at pipeline attribution within a trailing 9 months. So I am typically looking for some type of ROI on an event within a 9 month window. So I'm not going to know right away. Yes, there's always the event where you show up and you end up talking to 4 people that have the need right now. Like great, awesome, right? Ideally, you walk away from every event with at least one.
So what you're saying is on the flight back, you're probably not going to know. Um, and then you basically have a 9 month trailing. I mean, whatever. Like that's how your Rev Ops guys is calculating it. But ultimately, you basically kind of give yourself quite some time for that connection to nurture into actual
Yeah,
demand, right? Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I
And
can think of one of the very first dinners we ever did was with Pavilion in Denver. You know, 8 months later, we get a call from a CRO who attended it. The message was literally through LinkedIn, right? Hey, don't know if you remember me. I attended this dinner. We've got someone that's exiting the business. We need some help. Can we talk? And you have a
mhm,
signed contract in 21 days.
yeah.
Right? So, like, the goal with this is to always be top of mind and to make it so that folks are never even going to a second option. Build the trust, build the faith. Yeah.
No, exactly. I was about to say that, right? Kind of some of these assignments they feel pretty plug and play with you guys for your clients because the trust is already there, right? There's I would even assume some kind of a culture fit, and I mean this in a more corporate sense.
Mm,
That happens there where people then think like, you know what, I'll just get Cliff and his crew in, and that might even feel to them very plug and play instead of this other very anonymous option that they found on Google search, which they would never do anyway, by the way. so
yeah.
so that's basically how this works for you guys.
Yeah. A lot of it for sure. And I think the important part there is that the team delivers, right? The
Yeah.
team delivers. That there can be all the trust in the world in me as a person or a brand or whatever you want to call it. But at the end of the day, the team has to deliver. And that's what's made this work so well, is that the team always shows up. They're incredible.
Let's take this the other way around. What are things people misunderstand? What are misconceptions? What is it people do wrong around this? Maybe just kind of kicking you off a little bit. I think if you are selling a high commodity SMB, $9 a month kind of product, then maybe that isn't the right motion for you anyway. Right? So this is really more the consultative way. And I don't want you to necessarily kind of cluster this into like, hey, you need to be at this ACV, but what do you see other folks doing wrong when they start thinking about this kind of approach in building a revenue stream, whether that's the only one or it's the main one or it's just an adjacent one? What do you see most people do wrong here?
I think that they invest dollars without understanding what the time and effort is required in order to execute on that. You can be really scrappy and have a very effective event strategy. You can also spend a ton of money and get it completely wrong. It doesn't always make sense to spend $30, $40, $100,000, whatever it might be, on a booth. Is the right ICP going to be there? Do you have an execution plan of what you're going to do when you're actually in the room? Have you done the research ahead of time of who's going to be there and looked up all their faces on a lookbook or like on LinkedIn or however it is that your team does that? Right. Those are the things you need to be thinking about ahead of time, because you need to go into it with a plan.
So a couple of really interesting things here. Number one, you find a new event or you find an event. What are the prerequisites that need to be in place for you to be like, yeah, that's probably the right spot? And let's just say your ICP is going to be there, right? Does there have to be some kind of a requirement for you to say like, hey, I need a speaker slot, or I need a Q&A session, or I need to host a dinner? Or are there like specific check boxes that you guys have figured out that if this isn't in place, even though my ICP is there, probably doesn't make sense for me to show?
If enough of my ICP is there, it's probably worth it for me to throw a dinner. That's usually a given. Then there's probably going to be multiple events. The week before I saw you, I was at Pavilion CRO Summit in Denver, right? We did a dinner the night before. I was expecting 20 people. We got like 40 that registered, which is awesome. It's great. And we had like 25 that showed up. So we had to get more tables pushed together, to your point earlier. And that's always fun. The conversation's lively and people get value out of it, which is the goal for that is never to sell. It's, hey, we're all together. The goal is you should meet one or two new people that you find interesting that you want to connect with after this, right? I think that bringing of people together in itself is valuable. When it comes to other events, if I'm going to go to Europe, I'm probably going to I need a speaking slot, most likely, right? Otherwise, it's not necessarily worth the squeeze. And I think just where the European market is for me, from a Rev Ops perspective, it gives an opportunity to help educate about the things that we've been doing over here for the last 4.5 years. So, which again, people seem to be hungry for. Maybe I'm wrong, but the feedback seems to be
I think you're right about this. I'm hearing this dinner thing a lot, actually. More and more. And the thing is, to your point, if you want to be super scrappy about it, you can go out and have someone else foot the bill, actually, right? Kind of, there's always someone that wants to put the label on the dinner, whether that's Pavilion or someone else doesn't, I'm not sure kind of how this whole thing works. But to your point, you can put it together. You can bring the people there. You can be the, so to speak, the toastmaster of this thing, and make sure everyone has a good time. Everyone kind of becomes aware of you to a degree, but someone else could be the official sponsor and so forth, right? Is that, I kind of caught this right? Kind of that's that is a viable strategy. Let's just say it like that.
I would say it's a viable strategy. It's not the only one, but yeah, definitely viable.
Then tell us other awesome viable strategies to kind of get this off of the ground.
I mean, there's some fun ones out there, right? We haven't pulled this, but I've seen many other brands do this successfully, which is you go in and you wear something very loud and very
Yeah.
obnoxious, something that's going to get people's eyes. There's a fintech startup a while back. I don't even remember what they did. It was called Treasury. And I remember them showing up to SaaStr with a team of like 7 or 8, and they were all wearing gold sequined jackets, right? It stood out, right? Think about the Chili Piper branding, the black bomber jackets with the orange logo on it. Something that's different. And when you do it en masse, very consistent. There's another Salesforce consulting group called CRM Science, I think it is. And they always show up wearing lab coats, right? A little gimmicky, but you remember it, right?
Yeah.
For Carabiner, it was always the Carabiners, right? It's got our name on it. It's actually,
Yeah.
our name's actually what it is. And we've probably given away like, I don't know, 10,000 of these things over the last 5 years.
Crazy.
So, yeah, I mean, people have them on their leashes to walk their
Keychains.
dogs, or or keychains, or my wife uses it to attach one of the kids' water bottles to a backpack, you know?
Yeah.
They're handy, and then you see it. So it's not a tchotchke that someone's gonna throw in the trash the second they get back to their hotel room kind of thing.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's thoughtful ways to do things.
Wonderful. Is there anything else on this topic that you would like to add? I've kind of one other kind of connected question, but anything on the whole in-person thing, story where you're like, okay, this makes this whole thing work out for me, or where you kind of saw the light, or where you had doubts, or something like this? Any story you have that you
I
want to share?
really think it boils down to the way you show up. Be curious, ask questions, don't sell. Tell your salespeople not to sell. Build relationships, because your personal brand, the way people perceive you, the way that you're remembered, will outlast your time at any one company. You're building something for a career, not for a job.
So let's round that topic up here. And then I teased it a little bit in the beginning. And I think at that point, you and I each had at least one beer already. But I asked, I'm not sure how the topic actually came up, but someone was like, hey, what's the difference between the Rev Op, so it was a revenue operations kind of meetup. So we were in Berlin, the Rev Op co-op meetup in Berlin. And I think I was comparing it to the ones in New Orleans. And I asked you kind of what separates those two events. What was your reply there?
Yeah, and I think the Berlin one a little bit different because it was very small, comparatively speaking. Fun nonetheless, and I think a good crowd. But the Rev Ops community in Europe is a bit smaller than that in the States. But I think the big difference when you show up to a conference that's very Rev Ops focused, like Rev Ops AF, is that you're not being sold to, right? Everyone that's there is genuinely curious and trying to figure out how to do something better. It's very interesting that there's 350 some odd people in New Orleans, and there was like 5 that were obviously trying to sell to people, and it felt very different from every other conversation that you walked into, which was, oh, tell me what you're doing. What are you building? How are you building it? Like, oh, okay, you've got this idea, or I've done it that way. I felt like there's so much more learning and sharing of knowledge versus a lot of the sales conferences or go-to-market led conferences that I go to, where it almost feels like you're listening to people pitching you on stage.
Yeah, you also mentioned something else. Maybe you don't want to say that, but you mentioned another difference between the two.
I don't know if I remember.
Let me help you a little bit. You were talking about that in New Orleans, the conversation was a lot more strategic. Like why
Oh yeah,
doing
for
these
sure.
things
Yeah,
in comparison to what happened in Berlin.
which was very tactical. Yeah, the actual execution of things. I think that's a difference in the level of maturity in the market and the level of the attendees. A lot more of the folks in New Orleans were director and VP level, and some of them at larger companies, versus what we saw in Berlin, where most people there are either a RevOps team of 1 or 2, unless you're a Personio and you bring 25 people, right, to the conference. So very different, where they're so focused on that tactical because that's their day. And they're trying to get to the strategic, but they feel so overwhelmed with all the day-to-day stuff. They're trying to figure out how to get through that in order to even get a chance to come up here. Where in the States, you typically have a slightly larger team or a larger budget because the funding rounds are slightly larger, right? There's a lot that goes into that isn't necessarily a regional thing. I think it's based off of company size. It's based off of seniority.
No, exactly. It's no one's fault necessarily, but I think it's good to keep in mind that especially the European community still has, ways to grow in the right direction. Yeah, and I think this might also help some of the CROs and founders listening to understand why people on LinkedIn in general are so jazzed up about revenue operations and seeing all the benefits of it. And then they're in their own organization and then they see something else happening potentially, right? And that difference can also simply be because the experience of the force multiplier, impact that Rev Ops can have is maybe also just, currently different, right? But maybe let's end on that note, Cliff here. Thanks so much for jumping on, talking about really this, I think your crazy in-person approach and how beneficial it is. And let's see if people can learn from that, adapt this maybe into their own way of working and hopefully grow their companies.
Cool. Yeah, and if anyone ever has questions, feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn. We can always chat.
There you go. Cliff, thanks a bunch.
Thanks, Tony.
Next week, Roll and I are zooming in on consultants, when to bring them in, when to avoid them, and much more importantly, how to separate the great ones from the grifters. Hit subscribe if you don't want to miss it.
If LeBron James and Tiger Woods and Cristiano Ronaldo are better with a coach than without, you're probably too.
You will have then operators that, know a bunch of things really well, but have to stay broad to a large degree. And then once in a while, there will be a thing that requires deep understanding of a single issue. It doesn't make sense to hire that person in full time.
Stay away from the hammer people. They will have very clear, very repeatable answers that are just not necessarily addressing the problem. And most of all, very simplistic answers to quite complex problems.
I think consulting is a lot of selling of ideas, selling of views, selling of, change and stuff, but it is an actual skill in itself.